Today on Question Period, 2 degrees C, the climate change challenge after COP21 in Paris. A much-typed target, but will the Prime Minister and Premiers agree on how to reach it when they huddle in Vancouver this week?
Alors vous l'avez fait.
The deal was sealed in December. Nearly 200 countries approved the world's first universal climate agreement.
All countries have agreed to hold global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius.
It's an ambitious target. How will Canada balance competing interests to meet it? And what action is needed now to set the country on a path to a sustainable energy future?
Reducing our carbon footprint isn't just good for the planet, it's also good for business.
12 weeks after the euphoria of Paris, planning a national strategy begins in earnest on Thursday. With plunging oil prices driving down employment and revenue in resource-rich provinces, what's the best roadmap for moving to a low-carbon economy? How should governments share Canada's climate change burden? Joining me from Regina, Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall. Okay, so now the First Ministers are meeting on climate change on Thursday. What's your ask at the First Ministers? What do you expect will be the outcome?
Well, one idea that we're going to bring to the table is that before we sign on to any pan-Canadian initiative with respect to climate change, and I'm including a national carbon tax on that list, before we agree to something like that, it'll be Saskatchewan's position that there be an economic impact assessment done of the measure that's being proposed. You know, before any major economic project moves ahead, there needs to be and should be a rigorous environmental impact assessment done. We would make the same case with respect to some pan-Canadian climate change initiative like a national carbon tax. Let's find out what it would do to consumers. Let's find out what it might do to businesses, to an economy right now that's soft, certainly, that has its challenges, that is facing some headwinds. That's a specific idea we'll be proposing. We know that the country needs to do more with respect to carbon mitigation. We're focused on technological solutions on this front, by the way, with I think the highest per capita investment in the country in new technology that can help clean up some transitional fuels and sources of energy. But it'll be our position that we need to focus on the economic impact of whatever it is that we're proposing, especially when it's true that jobs may well hang in the balance.
Well, what about this $15 carbon tax the feds have been talking about?
Well, we oppose it, and we oppose it from the perspective of timing. You know, we don't think this is the right time for a carbon tax, given weaknesses in the Canadian economy, given the challenges we're facing in the energy sector, which is it's just a very important sector for all of Canada, not just for the provinces where the industry is resident. Our principle here for the next little while, at the least, I would suggest, is that we do no further harm to an economy that already has its hands full.
Okay, now you're the only Conservative Premier in the country. You've been the lone voice in criticizing the Trudeau government on a number of issues. What do you think of the Finance Minister's plan to run a deficit that could go as high as $30 billion?
Well, obviously, fiscal probity is a cornerstone of our own growth plan in the province of Saskatchewan. We've worked hard to earn a AAA credit rating, the first in our history, and that's based on some debt pay down and some successive balanced budgets. Having said that, because of $30 oil and other sort of attendant revenue softening, we're in a deficit right now. It's a modest one, and we're likely to have a deficit should we be reelected. We've said pretty clearly we're likely to have an even smaller deficit before we get back to balance in 17-18, and so, you know, I don't know what the federal books look like, but obviously these are things that we need to avoid as Canadians, both the provinces and the federal government, to the extent we can. But we're going to be into a modest deficit for this current year and next year before we're brought back to balance as well.
Well, look, Alberta and Saskatchewan have been hit very, very hard by the steep collapse in oil prices. What do you want in the federal government? What would you like to get?
Well, a couple of things. One, we've been relatively fortunate in the province of Saskatchewan that, notwithstanding the precipitous drop in the oil price and the loss of about 2,000 energy sector jobs, the last jobs report had our province's economy actually creating net new jobs, 5,200 new jobs, on the strength of an economy that's never been more diversified than it is right now. Having said that, there's real hurt in our energy sector, in our oil patch in the province, and so we are looking perhaps for a champion in the federal government with respect to Energy East. That would be at the top of the list. If we could have a pipeline built, if we could get our oil to Tidewater and get a better value for that oil, because right now, as you know, we don't get the Brent price. We get a price that's basically locked based on the fact that we have one customer, the United States. There's infrastructure dollars we hope that could flow to the provinces that are under some pressure from the energy sector challenges. And then specifically, Robert, you may be aware, we've proposed an oil well cleanup program, an abandoned or orphan well cleanup program that would put those same energy sector workers that have been laid off back to work and obviously take care of an environmental issue as well. And we've asked the federal government for their support in this regard as well.
Well, you know, we know the federal government is giving serious consideration. I'm almost certain they're going to do this, give Quebec or Bombardier in some form or another, probably in financial credits, about $1.4 billion. If that money goes to Bombardier, which is a very important industry to the country, then don't you think it's incumbent upon Quebec and the mayors of Montreal to say, maybe we have to step up and do our part for national unity and support Energy East?
I hope so. I hope that would be the case on a prima facie basis, actually. So notwithstanding whether Bombardier gets any money or not, I think there's a case for national support for the Energy East pipeline for some of the reasons I've mentioned. It's a very large shovel-ready stimulus project, thousands of jobs ready to be created in the conversion of the existing pipeline. And remember, it's 2/3 conversion and also new jobs to be created in the 1/3 of the pipeline that would be new. But for all the other reasons, in terms of getting a better value for the oil that belongs to Canadians and to give us a chance to displace the need for Canada to import oil from Saudi Arabia, that's case enough. I would offer this morning that there should be support for it nationally. However, you know, I do think there's discussion in Western Canada and across the country, and I think people are watching to see what happens with Bombardier. This is a company that's received a lot of support from taxpayers, and should there be more support, that's a decision the federal government needs to make, but it should be made in the context of also what's happening to the energy sector in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Newfoundland and Labrador.
So are you opposed to the government helping Bombardier, or you just want quid pro quo?
Well, no, I'm not opposed to that. I guess that's a decision the federal government would have to make. Our own provincial government, over its 8 years, we've avoided sort of picking winners and losers in terms of specific companies for government investment, where you use taxpayers as sort of venture capitalists, because it's been the experience in the province of Saskatchewan that when governments pick winners and losers, they generally only get it half right, and it's not necessarily the good half. But no, we're not opposed to the federal government doing what it thinks it needs to do in terms of different regions of the country. But the context needs to be this, that there have been tens of thousands of jobs lost in the energy sector, and the price will come back. But in the meantime, there should be some transitional recognition that the sector needs support, and that's why we've proposed some very specific and temporary measures that might provide that help if the federal government would help provide some of the resources to get it done. The oil well cleanup piece is what I'm referring to.
The Prime Minister is going to be going to Washington on March the 10th to meet the President. He's going to have a state dinner. What is the issues that you think need to be raised with the President? You don't get these opportunities very much.
Well, credit Prime Minister Trudeau for getting that opportunity, because you're right, it's very significant. You know, I would say that trade would be at the top of the list. Obviously, the Keystone Pipeline, I hope, will be discussed, even though some will point out, you know, with some cause, that it's a bit of a dead letter. But the issue of trade, I hope, is front and center, and specifically the TPP. We need in the federal government a champion for this trade agreement. It will be very important for the province of Saskatchewan, for the agricultural sector, for the forestry sector. It's important for Canada, and we know there's more than a few barriers to TPP proceeding in the U.S., the ratification of the agreement because of what's happening in the Congress. And so I hope the Prime Minister will make trade and TPP specifically a top priority when he meets with the President.
Premier Wall, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert.